So our next panel, the penultimate panel, is going to be covering accountability and commitments for the future. Something that's really important if we are going to truly increase our impact is to really garner that conviction in order to drive through the difficulties that we're all aware of with regards to driving systemic change. So we've got a great panel for you, and it's going to be led by Duncan Ross, who is from the Times Higher Education.
Yes, very much not the Times. Rupert threw us out a number of years ago.
Yeah, that's right. And Duncan is referred to as a data philanthropist. He shares the insights and is going to help guide us through this the topic of accountability and commitment. So over to you, Duncan.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for staying to this, the penultimate session today. As has been said, my name is Duncan Ross. I am the Chief Data Officer of Times Higher Education. But today is about accountability, or this session is about accountability. So I would like to start by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, and that we pay our respects to the ancestors, as well as to past, present, and emergent leaders. Now, I'd like to invite the panel to briefly introduce themselves, rather than me introducing them. And to make that fair, I thought I would start. So my name is Duncan Ross. As you've heard, I work for Times Higher Education. I'm not, however, a journalist, so you can say whatever you like today, and I won't report on it. But I am something far worse. I create rankings of universities, not yet of business schools. Okay. And in particular, one of the rankings that we have produced over the last 5 years has been the impact rankings, which looks at how higher education institutions are addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. And that ability for universities to account for their actions is critically important, because I believe they have a fundamentally important and crucial role to play, both in terms of what they do operationally, but also in terms of their research and their teaching. However, to make the introductions a bit more fun, I did say that I would ask the panel not just to introduce themselves, but also to tell you all one thing about them that no one else in the room is likely to know. So I ought to do that for myself as well. And I will say that I was once in a really bad grunge band, and then slightly later in a reasonably good folk band. So don't ask how I went from grunge to folk. It's a strange, strange transformation. But with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the panelists. So running from the far side, we have Rob Hales from Griffith University in Australia. We have Lisa Fröhlich from the UN Prime Board. And we have Nick Igneri from AACSB. So Rob, tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yes, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to talk today. From Griffith University, I've previously been a Centre Director of Sustainability in the Business School. And as part of that role, I was co-lead with the Deputy Vice-Chancellor to look at our ranking for the university on Times Higher Education SDGs. We also are proud to have an MBA that's ranked as #1 in the world in terms of corporate knights, a green MBA. So we've been involved in that process of getting to that point for about 10 or 15 years to get to that point. And something about myself, I used to have a company and I used to guide Himalayan peaks.
Okay, very impressive. Lisa, can you beat that? Not that it's a competition.
Not
Oh, there was one other thing.
Oh.
I wanted to acknowledge in terms of accountability, the gender imbalance. Over to you, Elisa.
We talked about this for hours. Yeah. And I'm also the only not native speaker here on the panel, so I have
unless
a lot of
language is
disadvantages,
German,
but I really did my very best. So, yeah, I got a little bit of unintended famousness yesterday, because I'm also chairing on the board the Nomination Governance Committee. So, as all of you recognize. Yeah, I have also the role as the DACH chapter chair, so the DACH region, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So I do quite a lot for Prime, but I have to also confess that I love this organization because I have never learned so much like the last 4 or 5 years I'm working for Prime. So that's really, really cool. And this is maybe the new thing, I was the president of CBS International Business School in Germany for more than 10 years. And I worked for this university more than 17 years. And I really enjoyed the previous speeches, because I will stay self-employed, because I was carefully thinking about this topic, because I'm not a very risk-taking person, let's say. I was always a single mom, yeah, and so I was always very careful with everything. But I learned from these speeches today really a lot, because it's I think what we have to stop doing is always justifying ourselves and discussing everything and saying, you make this wrong, you make this wrong. So we should really join forces and go forward and really try to make this sustainable transformation happen. And so I really got a lot of positive impact on this, that I want to avoid the situation, and I really want to go for what I think is good in terms of achieving this sustainable transformation.
Thank you very much. And over to you, Nick.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Igneri. I'm the Chief Product Officer at AACSB. So you might say, well, what does that type of person do? Well, it's a couple of multi-pronged type of role. As many of you probably know, AACSB is an accrediting body, and I lead the learning and development function that teaches you all about how to meet your accreditation standards. But more interestingly for me, I'm also in charge of their societal impact products, which is, I think, an amazing opportunity for AACSB and our member community to, for AACSB to be involved in the societal impact space, because we have this reach, that we can reach a lot of schools at one time, which is amazing. I'm also responsible for our data products. One thing about me, a couple things about me that you might find interesting. First, I am a native New Yorker. I was born and raised in this beautiful city, and I live in St. Petersburg, Florida at this point, but always welcome an opportunity to come back to New York whenever I can. And like Duncan, I played in a rock band also. So I was a bass player.
What did you play?
I played bass.
That's two of us. So, okay, we're now going to descend into just a boring discussion about basses. Sorry.
I had a Rickenbacker. So anyways.
What, 401?
401, yes.
I've got a Roger Waters P bass, which means I am duty bound basically to offend everyone else in the band and storm off.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry,
All right.
I love the bass talk, sorry.
All right.
Okay, right. So, in terms of accountability, I guess the starting point, of course, is, well, where are we? So, by a show of hands, panelists, so put your hands up if you think current leaders are succeeding in building a sustainable future. So, hands up if you think they are.
That was unscripted too, by the way.
I'm
It's a sort of the bare level, yeah.
Okay, so give me some examples of where you think leaders are succeeding and perhaps where they're not.
Over to me.
You did the wavy hand.
I did the wavy hand.
I think coming from our region, and this sort of matches up with the direction of some of the things we've been talking about in the conference in terms of humanistic and people-oriented directions. I think, the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has come up in conversations just, after, at the restaurants about leadership. And I think that speaks volumes, I think, to the democratic and inclusive style that she had. But one of the things in terms of gendered leadership, in terms of women in leadership roles, the research says that a lot of self-reflection happens. And I think what happened to Jacinda Ardern is that there was that heightened criticism that happened in that role. So even though she was actually doing a fantastic job in terms of that style, then it became too much, and that self-reflection kicked in, I think.
Nick?
Well, I think in speaking to schools and businesses for the past year and a half about this topic, what was presented to me, and I kind of like the concept, we have a supply and demand problem, I think, right? And what I mean by that is when I speak to schools about impact, they say, well, the recruiters coming to our school aren't recruiting for impact. They're recruiting for basic business skills, right? So why should we change our curriculum? Why should we do all this work when that's not what the market seems to want, right? And then when we go to business and speak to them, when you're at a senior level in business, they'll talk about impact, they'll talk about sustainability, but as you get further down into the organization, what we find, especially the recruiters, they're unaware of that maybe shift that's happening in business. So, so the recruiters aren't recruiting for these skills at schools. So I think the good point is that schools are educating students on basic business skills, which is seemingly what businesses want, but they're not expanding that in the impact space. And I think that is a problem, but we have to align the business need to the curriculum within the university, and we have to figure out how to get those two entities speaking more closely together. So there's an alignment. Right now, I see this disalignment in that space.
Lisa, what more can business schools do about that? You led a business school.
There had been really 2 or 3 interesting points from your side, because first of all, I strongly believe in this fact that we should, as a business school, we should not only follow the requirements of the companies, we have to make them aware of what they need in the future. Yeah, so this was a huge discussion with my CEOs all the time, because I'm a very much forward-looking visionary person, and I always want to change something. This is one point, and another interesting thing is I'm pretty much into this positive language. So my major research area is sustainable supply chain management with a strong focus on sustainable procurement. And as you know, all in Europe, we have one law after the other, yeah, and all the companies are all the time complaining, yeah, because they only learn from the governments that what kind of punishments they have to expect when they are not fulfilling the requirements. And I always say, look, you have to go for what's in for you. Yeah. So because every law, and if it's only the fact that you sleep better because you know your supply chain is safe, yeah, then you have also gained something. Yeah. And this is what companies do not understand. And when I have a closer look at our title, accountability and commitment, yeah. So I'm not a native speaker, but for me, commitment means I have to give up something. I have to sacrifice something. And this is again not positive language. Yeah. And also risk. Yeah, my daughter is always complaining, for example, that her generation has to make up with all the troubles we have created in our generation. And I say, look, but on the other side, you have an amazing possibility right now, yeah, to change the world. Yeah. So 15 years ago, I didn't have this opportunity. So I believe strongly in this fact that we have to all stakeholders, doesn't matter, companies, students, our colleagues, we have to create awareness for the opportunities, and we have to also create a common understanding of what we really want to achieve and a more holistic view. Yeah, not only the specific problem we are working on, so we have to see the big picture.
Which really sounds like a challenge of leadership. And one of my concerns here, because one of the things I'm really interested in, I look at a lot of data from universities, and some universities are clearly performing more strongly than others. And the question to my mind is always, well, what is different about their leadership, the people who are running that university, that makes it successful, makes those changes? And by the way, I don't necessarily mean, you know, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. Talking about universities like Western Sydney University, for example, which I would say is doing a fantastic job, but isn't a traditionally great research institution. Is there more that we need to do in terms of leading business schools, in terms of being positive leaders ourselves, in order to demonstrate that to the people, to the students who come through our business schools?
Yeah, I've given this a bit of thought, because thinking about the strategy of SDG submission to the Times Higher Education for the university means that the business school gets dragged into that process. And a lot of the time when we've got the principals, the new principal in terms of walking the talk, in terms of operation for our principals at PRME, the business schools tend to say, well, we're not part of, we're not part of that process. We're not leading it, so therefore we can't be fully engaged in leading the SDGs within that area. So they have to contribute to it. So I think that's a bit of a challenge for business schools. But I think one of the good things about the Times Higher Education ranking process, I mean, we can all complain about particular rankings, whether we're up there or not up there, and where should we spend our energy. But I think one of the good things about the SDGs is that outside-in approach. And then that outside-in approach happens, and then within the organisation, I'm not sure what happened in your organisations, but sort of like a democratisation of what SDGs should be placed up into that selected SDG range for the submission. But then there was the conversations about trying to get that happening. And then everyone was looking to see what they were doing outside. So it was actually like a distributed leadership process of just having that Times Higher Education ranking, of which the business school, because it wanted to walk the talk, because it put sustainability as a future-oriented, unique value proposition for the business school. So therefore, we were very engaged, and that's why I became part of the ranking submission process.
So that touches on something I think that's very important about the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the things, and I am sitting on the SDG 17 cushion here, so I feel obliged to say this. But one of the things I like about the SDGs is, for all their faults, and they do have faults, they are a construct of agreement amongst a large number of countries. There is this theme running through them of interaction between the SDGs and between different parts of society and different parts of organizations. And Lisa, we were talking earlier about this idea of what more could business schools potentially do to support people who might be leaders, not in business, but elsewhere in society. Is there anything you'd like to kind of expand upon on that?
I like the approach of Robert, because this is what I meant with, we have to come up with this common understanding what we can do. I did a research on circular procurement. We finished it last month, and I asked my students, I said, bring please the SDGs in, and ask them if you can use the SDGs as a kind of evaluation tool to monitor the progress you make in circular procurement. And none of the companies said yes. And they all said, this is this theoretical concept, and you are working with this, but we can't apply this. Yeah, this is what I mean with we need this common vision here, and this is the role what we have to do as business schools. We have to train them to understand what kind of sub-targets to use, what kind of numbers. I have a friend, she's working for this Research Data Alliance, and she's always complaining because the companies are not giving away the data we desperately need in terms of really understanding what kind of SDGs can be achieved and what kind of SDGs not. Yeah, Sander told us last day that 12%, or what is it? Yeah, so but that's obvious because nobody really understands what can be done to do this. Yeah, and we have also to train our students. I also see this in my lectures. Yeah, so it's so difficult to make them understand how this works in the long run. Yeah? And then you have leadership in your business school also with no understanding of the SDGs. Yeah? And they only say, be successful at Times Higher ranking, write whatever you want to write. Yeah? This is not the way it should be. Yeah? We should focus on 2-3 SDGs where we can really make an impact, and then we have to collaborate. So SDG number 17, yeah, we have to work together in a certain area, for example, or in a country, and then we maybe can achieve half of the SDGs. Yeah, and the same discussion I have every time with the UN Global Compact local network in Germany, because they also don't understand it. Yeah, and we need really a kind of communicative platform, yeah, so that we better understand what we can do, because the SDGs are outstanding. Yeah, this is the only global evaluation tool we have, and we should not give up on this really, really outstanding opportunity we have here.
And Nick, from your perspective as someone who's gathering data from AACSB, is there more that can be done in terms of putting that common understanding together through the data that we look at?
I'm not sure about that, but I think what I want to mention in this particular topic, which I think is interesting, is we all have to think about how we, you mentioned it too, the businesses will come, but businesses aren't really going to change unless they have to change, right? I worked in the business world for most of my career, and businesses just aren't going to change unless they're forced to change. So as consumers, like what we purchase is really important, because as we purchase more products that are built sustainably and manufactured sustainably, that will drive more and more companies to move in that direction. As young leaders who are sitting in the front here, who are you going to go work for, right? Because organizations need talent, right? And if young leaders don't go work for organizations because of what and how they produce product, will force organizations to change. But I think from the business school perspective, we started this research project on leadership competencies that are important in societal impact. And one of them that I think is really intriguing is the competency of dealing with paradox, right? Because all businesses will eventually shift, become more sustainable, but they're not going to shift overnight and be these wonderful, sustainable companies that love the planet and love their people. It's going to be a progression. It's going to a process. And I think young leaders entering a business have to understand how to deal with the sort of the A business, right? Which is, how do I make money? How do I make profit? How do I do that in the cheapest way? And sort of the B business, which is going to move towards a more sustainable, green way of doing business. And kind of going into business thinking you're going to just shift it is kind of naive, I think, and it's going to cause a lot of frustration from young leaders entering business. So embedding young leaders with sort of this different mindset of how business should operate and how to deal with both sides of the business, I think will infiltrate companies. And as they move up into the organization, maybe they can really shift the dynamic that happens in organizations. But we really have to think about how we're going to shift the business, how we're going to prepare the leaders to live in this sort of fragmented world that they're going to enter, and then how do they begin to move it more significantly as they take higher leadership roles in organizations.
So we are running out of time. We promised we'd end 5 minutes early in a desperate attempt to bring things back on time. It's not going to work, but we're going to try. Given what Nick just said there, I think to wrap this up, to really move things forward, can we all think of just one thing that would give us hope for the future, one thing that could help business schools to educate better leaders?
One thing.
Each, not one thing together, you know.
Okay.
That would make 4 things in total.
Trying to sum it up in a couple of sentences is tricky, but I did actually ask probably about 20 people out there what hope actually was. And it was really interesting to do that because there was quite a range. I can see the clock here. I can't talk too much. But there was a range. But hope is about agency. And hope is about trying to think about predictability. How predictable is it that we're going to have a positive future? Are we going to stay under 1.5 degrees, for example? You know, it's probably going to happen before 2027, says the World Meteorological Organization. So in terms of something that, like one thing, I've been thinking about that, and I think it goes back even to Mary Parker Follett's idea of power with as opposed to power over. And the concept of power sharing is, I think, one of the critical theoretical and practical things that we can do in business and also in our education space, particularly with the idea, instead of having corporate social responsibility, we have corporate political responsibility.
Lisa?
So coming back to what you just said is, first of all, I think we should in business school take care a lot more about what happens after they deserve the degree. So really to do also research on this, yeah, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of very motivated young leaders, they enter the company and then they let's say collide with this strange reality, let's say, and then they give up. Yeah. So and this is something we should not accept, because this is our future. Yeah, that the new young leaders, that they are willing to come in and change the companies. And I am not so pessimistic that you cannot change the companies, because most of the companies, they want to change, but they do not really know how. So we have to, collaboration is, from my point of view, it's the future. Yeah, so we all have to work together. We have to be willing to also accept other disciplines, other ideas, yeah, and to carefully think about this. And when we do it like this, then I think we have a good chance to really make something happen. And common understanding, common vision, common activities, and not thinking only about the own individual targets, but thinking about what is my impact to society. And everything which is not contributing to society should be stopped, full stop.
A couple things. One is the courage for business schools to have courage to make a shift, right, and to take a risk. Because I find that schools are like businesses, really. I don't think there's a big difference, but it's hard to change, and people get into their role and their process, and they stick within it. So the courage to move outside of that, and two, I would say to really focus on learning. I mean, we're learning institutions, right? But do we learn from our students and what they want and how they see the world? Do we learn from other universities about how they're changing curriculum and what impact they're making, and kind of use each other to as support mechanisms to move forward?
And I think I would echo that final point. I think that idea of learning from what others are doing, which is quite challenging in the education space. A lot of the time, educationalists want to keep their curricula to themselves. They want to keep their learnings to themselves. And actually going out there and understanding what other people have done, taking the best examples and making them even better. But I also like to echo what you said about listening to young people. One of the things that we have seen through the impact rankings is how often universities have come back to us and said, we realize there is a disconnect between our leadership, who are largely older people like us, often from a very different demographic to the people applying and people coming to education. And that disconnect between our expectations and the expectations of young people. So listen to young people, listen to what they're saying. You will probably find them much more committed to sustainability than you may imagine.
Yes.
But with that, we are out of time. I'd like you to give a warm round of applause to our fantastic panel, Rob, Lisa, and Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And I hand back to our very impressively white-suited compere.
Thanks very much, Duncan. Thank you to the panel.